Hey guys, Geezer Ted. You know, during my 2 years of national service, I was lucky. I never had to face the devastating loss of losing a brother right there next to me. But war has a long reach, doesn't it? And in 2016, it found my family when my boat died in Afghanistan. And that devastating loss, for the first time, I started understanding what it meant, the depth and the pain that many of you have been going through for decades after losing a butt or a brother or a fellow soldier during your national service. Almost 9 years ago, I got a phone call from my butt's wife. And she gave us the devastating news that he had died in Afghanistan. He was working for private contractors. He had been in Iraq, where he worked for the Department of Defense. And when the Americans pulled out of Iraq, he then went to Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was different because when you work for the DoD, the Americans, they had resources, they had their agenda in dealing with the Iraqis and insurgents, and the private contractors had specific roles to play. I'm not saying that wasn't the case in Afghanistan, but in Afghanistan, the DoD wasn't there. It sounded like it was flipping the Wild West. Private contractors were doing all sorts of jobs: close body protection, route investigation, training of the police force and the armed forces, close body protection of politicians and I don't know, high-ranking officials. So he couldn't tell me all the details around it, but when you have this kind of loss, when you have this kind of experience, especially in another country, it creates a gap in your life, because I had chatted to him like 6 months before, and he said this was his last stint. He was coming home, and he'd been in the Middle East for a number of years now, and statistically, he had run his course. He was one of the fortunate ones, because many of the guys that had been over there, especially the South Africans, because they love the South Africans and the Aussies and the New Zealanders and even the Indian oaks, the Commonwealth oaks, these oaks used to fight. And they weren't like the Yanks. The Yanks would just be playing flipping Metallica and tear down the main street in their Humvees, and the South Africans would take the side roads and be a little bit more circumspect. You know, South Africans are clever. They're not like the Yanks who just tore down the main stretch and just drilled into IEDs and got... Anyway, the problem for me was, it was his last stint. I knew he was coming home. And he said it was rough over there. He said it was like gang town. I don't know, the poppy trade, I don't know. There's so many things that were going on in Afghanistan at that time. You know, I don't know who were the right oaks, who were the good guys, who were the bad guys. You don't know. You know, in war or in areas of conflict, those lines get blurred. But I don't want to talk about that. I think the sad part for me is that I knew this was his last stint, and he was coming home to his kids and his wife. He had young kids, and he was trying to make a living. Some of his history was he was a firefighter here in KwaZulu-Natal. Then, because of certain political motivations, you know, he couldn't get, he couldn't go further than what he was in his positions. Then he decided to go into the Royal Marine Commandos, and he was stationed after his basics and all those kinds of things. He was stationed at, I think, Squadron 45 in Arbroath, Scotland. And he did a lot of training. He trained in Nevada, in the US. He trained in the North Sea. They did a lot of amphibious training, SBS training. And I don't get me wrong, I don't think they did special boat service, but they did amphibious training. They did desert training. They did Arctic training. They did all sorts of training. And so when you resign from them, my dad had heart issues, and my boat resigned and discharged himself, and came down here, back to South Africa, and he couldn't get a job. He couldn't place himself because now he was a soldier. Now he was a fighting man. He tried to run a business. He wasn't successful in the business, although he was a hard worker. He tried, but my dad was a parabat. My dad found solidarity in. I'm getting emotional. My dad found solidarity with in the army and the parabats. I found solidarity with PTRs and regimental instructors course when I was in the Air Force. And my boot found solidarity with men of the same ilk, soldiers. He was a helper. He was an ops medic. He was a firefighter. He really wanted to help people. But he couldn't get he couldn't get a job. He couldn't get work. This is what he knew. So that when he was, in another man's war, I understood, although I knew the risks. He wasn't happy doing it, but he wasn't scared to feed his family with the basics of protecting somebody else and using the skills that he had. He wasn't scared to be a soldier. But this was different. This wasn't protecting South Africa. This was in the Middle East. This was in another man's war. As a hired gun, as a hired soldier. But that's where his path took him. And the decisions that he made, took him to that environment. And I remember him saying to me, he said, that was the devil's place. The way that those people in the Middle East used their kids and their women as weapons of warfare, he said that was Satan's land. War has this way of dehumanizing us. And I think the loss that I experienced finally opened my eyes to what many of you, that for many, many years have felt. That when you came back from the border, or you lost friends in action, or in different contacts, when you had contact, either you lost a mate who bled out right there next to you. I had a friend who had mates who bled out right next to him. There was a mate of mine who was in the armoured division. He had mates dying next to him. A mate of mine was a recce. He had mates who were killed right next to him. I worked for a guy who was injured in a contact. He was in one mil for many years. But that kind of PTSD, the Yanks came up with that word, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Many of our guys never faced the consequences of losing a mate, or never faced the reality. It was just a salute, a handshake, and achache. You're gone. After 2 years, you're out. I don't know. So I remember some of the guys saying they had half an hour debrief and then they were gone. Back into civil life. Either going back to study. I left the army. I left the Air Force, and then I went to go study at Technicon as a 19-year-old. I can't imagine what some of you guys who lost mates went through. It's almost incomprehensible. And the loss of my boot, the death of my brother, has opened my eyes to, I wouldn't say that, it's the dark side. The dark side to what many of us as men who went back into civil life, got back to girlfriends, then got married, then had kids. Nobody spoke about it. Now and again, you'll see a guy after a couple of dopes start opening up a little bit, then he shuts down again. Because it's hard. The loss of my board, it leaves so many unanswered questions. It's what was he fighting for? Did he achieve his goals? No, he lost. He lost his family. his kids are eternally affected. Now, where does that leave us? Previous video. During a previous video, I mentioned there were two constants, and the one I want to mention was God. The losses that we faced, we can't change. But what do we do now? There's 50-year-olds, 55-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 65-year-olds that lost mates, brothers, family members. I have a hope, and I know God is with me. I know God was with my boat. I have a hope that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross and was resurrected, that is my hope. That peace that I shared with you that night when I was in basics, and I remember singing that song, and I slept well for the first time in a long, long time. This is not just Bible preaching. This is pure. This is spiritual. I felt it. I knew it. And if it wasn't for this hope that I have, this tangible, it is a tangible hope. I can't see God. I can't feel Him. But I know. Many examples. One of them is, I remember when I went to Bergslack, we were doing doggies course after we got our rank and our swords. We took a lot of our troops up to Bergslack to dog school, and we did a doggies course there. And I remember losing my mind one morning. My oaks were just making me the absolute crossing. And I lost my mind, and I started fluking at them and shouting at them and making them run around like hooligans. And we broke for tea. And I remember walking away and said, this is not me. This is not who I am. My peace was gone. I was upset. It was crazy. They didn't need to be treated like that. They were done with basics. This was an extra course for them to do security phase. And I remember going into a room at Bergslack, and I just put my head down and I said, God, my peace is gone. Please help me. And His peace flooded me. And it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It was like scales had fallen from my eyes. It was weird. I don't know how to explain it, but I got out of that room and I apologized to my guys. And we formed a bond during that time. And that's the hope I'm talking about. After the trauma of losing a friend, a mate, a brother, there is a hope. There is a peace. And only you can find it. After my brother's death, I can only imagine what some of you have gone through. I've gone through my own pain, my own hurt, but I'm also going through my own peace because I believe God gave me that peace. And that peace is yours. Till next time.